Okay, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. This is the third quarterly Society for Integrative Oncology Patient Advocate call. And we're really excited today because we're going to hear from a couple of very strong, busy advocates, some of the strongest and busiest advocates that I know in integrative oncology. And we're going to really find out about ways to improve our voice for research and legislative advocacy. Our first speaker today is Desiree Walker. And Desiree is a two-time breast cancer victor. She is a member of our SIO Patient Advocate Committee and our Health Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Task Force. She's a panelist at last year's SIO Conference discussion on healthcare disparities following Dr. Otis Browley's keynote address. Desiree is a president of the board of directors of the Young Survivor Coalition. She's a member of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship and the Cancer Policy Advocacy Team, or CPAT team at NCCS, and has worked on redefining functional status and the telehealth project steering committees. She is also a member of the NCI Cancer Prevention Control Central Institutional Review Board. And as part of Share Cancer Support Side-by-Side program, Desiree trains medical students and doctors on how to deliver disappointing news and communicate effectively with people diagnosed with cancer. She is a patient partner co-investigator for a clinical trial at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center Integrative Medicine Service in New York City, and so much more. And our second speaker today is Jodi MacLeod. She is the secretary at Society for Integrative Oncology. She is my fellow co-chair for the Patient Advocate Committee at SIO. She is also a co-chair of the Health Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Task Force. And she's active on a number of different committees at SIO, including communications, conference planning, and the membership task force. She has served as a patient partner co-investigator since 2015 for integrative oncology comparative effectiveness trials at the University of Pennsylvania and Memorial Sloan Kettering Integrative Medicine Service. And in addition, she maintains a blog called Right for Wellness. We're really excited to have you to give us some great information and tips on how to be more effective in our advocacy. So Desiree, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, all, and thank you so much, Betsy, for that introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to share with this group this afternoon. I'm going to share my screen. Somehow it got a little ahead of things. So what we've entitled our talk this afternoon is Finding Your Voice in Research and Legislative Advocacy. And I am thrilled to present with Jodi this afternoon. I think that it's important, I'm a quotes person, and so I just want to share this quote from Mother Teresa. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And in the world of advocacy, I would say it is so important for you to align yourselves with like-minded people. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about what advocacy is, some types of advocacy, some advocacy skills. Jodi is going to share her research advocacy journey. I am going to share my advocacy journey. I think we will also share some tips on how to be an effective advocate. And we will also open it up for some question and answer. And I just would like to say that although, you know, the majority of us have been doing different types of advocacy over the years, some of us may be newbies, and we just wanted to make sure that we set the stage and the platform so that we're all talking and looking at advocacy in the same way as we move forward. So I am actually taking a definition from the National Cancer, NCCS, let me just make it simple for myself. In terms of what is the definition for advocacy. And advocacy, they define it as taking action. It's speaking and acting on behalf of yourself, which many people do in terms of self-advocacy. But what we are really here to emphasize is for the others and being in support of someone else, a place, or a thing. I think that it's also important for us to just also talk about the types of advocacy. I know for myself, I started out doing self-advocacy to ensure that I had the best possible treatment for my breast cancer. I've also had an opportunity to do outreach, community outreach, and I'm sure many of you have done that as well. But for the sake of this afternoon, we really want to zero in on research advocacy as well as legislative advocacy. And I took a definition from the CISN Cancer group, and they define research advocacy as to be actively participating in all aspects of research, just from the basic bench science through the implementation of practice, changing the interventions that can benefit the patient. And NCCS talks about legislative advocacy, taking action to influence social, political, and economic systems that will bring about change for different groups of people. I think that it's important, you know, when you get into advocacy, there's an element of being self-aware. It's important for you not only to understand, but you also need to educate yourself. So I pose a few things. When someone suggests to you that you do something, do you ask yourself, is it really the right fit for you at the end of the day? How do you prepare for the issues? And how are you going to tackle it? Is it based on what you've heard, or do you do some sort of research to make sure that you always have the facts? And then it's also important to know whether or not you've actually experienced oppression and or stigma, because that will also help determine how you advocate in the future. And I think it's also important to think about, are you comfortable disclosing your diagnosis or your new realities, or if it's too painful? Because I often like to say, although we all have perfected our elevator pitch to share our story, the story is not necessarily as impactful if you are too emotional when you are conveying it. And it's also important to know your personality and how you deal with problems. Are you all right with letter writing? And just, determining how you are able to solve issues at the end of the day. And I would just pose these questions for you to think about. When do you feel you're most effective when you're trying to solve a problem? How satisfied are you with the way you react when something doesn't go right? How confident are you in analyzing the problems that you face? Do you feel like you know how to solve problems that you face? And do you follow through until a problem is solved? This self-awareness will help you to determine what course of advocacy is best for you and what areas you may need to strengthen. Now, I think it's also important to know that there are definitely lots of soft skills that are important. And as we see from this word cloud, patience is at the center. And I think that this is something that is very important, because one of the things, whether you're a patient advocate or you've gotten into advocacy because of a loved one, you want everything to happen yesterday. And your sense of urgency, you feel everyone should share that. And that is not always the reality. And so it is important to realize being patient is important. You have to be flexible, because oftentimes you are really trying to encourage and change someone's thinking and or approach. But I think that one of the things, those of us who have actually had a diagnosis and gone into advocacy, we will utilize resilience. We've been resilient with our treatment, our disease. And then when you get into advocacy, you will also see a different form of resilience there. And so there are so many different skills that are important to either have and continue to hone, or those that you will actually cultivate. And so at this particular time, I want to turn it over to Jodi so that she can begin to share her journey as a research advocate.
Thank you, Desiree. It's been 17 years since I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm so grateful my oncology team threw every available curative treatment at my aggressive triple positive breast cancer. You know the drill: surgery, dose-dense chemo. Back then I gave myself Neulasta injections, targeted immune therapy, hormone therapy, more surgery, and finally aromatase inhibitors. By 2013, I was mostly bedridden with side effects from all this treatment and cancer fatigue, and the aromatase inhibitors were giving me muscle and joint pain. So I participated in a clinical trial at University of Pennsylvania on acupuncture for aromatase inhibitor-induced arthralgia, fatigue, and sleep disturbance. It was at that intake appointment that I met Dr. Jun Mao. Drum roll. He figures highly in my story. I was randomized to the electroacupuncture arm of the study, and while I wasn't an acupuncture responder, I was thrilled just to participate in the clinical research. After the study closed, Dr. Mao asked me to join 8 other cancer survivors to be involved in a new kind of trial as patient advisors. And this new trial was going to be funded by the PCORI, which stands for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in Washington, D.C. More on that in a bit. Dr. Mao also invited me to attend the SIO 2016 conference in Miami, where the first speaker could have been reading from my medical records. He was explaining his research on how chemotherapy for breast cancer can increase circulating inflammatory cytokines, inducing these cascading negative side effects, including emotional distress. And suddenly I realized that I wasn't alone in my experience, that there's research on this, and that integrated medicine could help me. So I already knew from my mental health care the power of art therapy and music therapy. And I went home from this SIO conference armed with research, and I began to implement my own practices of yoga and mindfulness meditation. I took the online class, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, out of UMass, and I continued to periodically overhaul my nutrition and physical activity regimens, depending on changing needs. And slowly, by adding these integrated practices into my self-care habits, I began to feel better. Until today, I can sustain my active life, my work in research and the SIO, and my family life. This is what integrative medicine does for us, right? It empowers us with a sense of agency to improve our quality of life and actually enjoy all those extra birthdays that conventional treatment has given us. Next slide, please, Desiree. So now back to that PCORI study. So that became the choice study, or choosing options for insomnia and cancer effectively. This was 2015 through 2018. And it was a comparative effectiveness trial of acupuncture versus cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia in cancer survivors. Our patient advisor involvement in the study informed the research design, which was modified to include mixed methods research design and Dr. Francis Barg's lab at University of Pennsylvania. We were an active patient advisor group. There was great interaction between the research team, Dr. Mao, Dr. Sheila Garland, and their team, and us patient advisors. A free give and take according to those PCORI principles of co-learning and mutual respect. And what we all had in common from the very beginning was our appreciation for Dr. Mao and who he was and his work. My work for the choice study suited my introverted writer personality, and it let me use my writing skills to craft web content, web-based content, the study website, a patient advisor blog. I worked remotely on my laptop before it was a thing during the pandemic. And then I attended the biannual stakeholder meetings, either at Penn or then later on at Memorial Sloan Kettering, as Dr. Mao moved to take the position of Chief of Integrative Medicine Service at MSKCC in Manhattan. So my aha moment when I realized that my research work was making a difference and it had value was during the SIO 2017 conference in Chicago, when on my email popped up a notification that the article that I had co-written with Dr. Sheila Garland and 3 other patient advisors from the choice study would be published in a JNCI monograph. That's the Journal of the National Cancer Institute monograph entitled Including the Patient Voice in Patient-Centered Outcomes Research. And as a writer, to have your name in a journal like that and an NCBI searchable, that was just really thrilling for me. I was making a difference and moving the field forward. The choice study stakeholder engagement continued past 2018 when the study closed into 2019 with a PCORI Engagement Award funding the pre-conference workshop at the 2019 SIO Conference in New York City. The workshop was called Sleeping Well After Cancer. Desiree, Betsy, and I participated in that, and that was also where we connected with Kimberly Richardson, Milagros Elia, Marianne Sarsage, and others who are active in PAC, and so many more. PAC is Patient Advocate Committee for the SIO. And in November of last year, a white paper from this pre-conference workshop was published in the Journal of Cancer Survivorship entitled, this one I have to have help reading. Oh, Multi-Stakeholder Perspectives on Managing Insomnia in Cancer Survivors, Recommendations to Reduce Barriers and Translate Patient-Centered Research into Practice. Today, Desiree and I are patient partner co-investigators at MSK for another PCORI-funded trial called IMPACT, which is integrative medicine for pain in patients with advanced cancer. And it's another comparative effectiveness trial. And this one compares acupuncture with massage therapy for chronic pain in this very vulnerable cancer population of people diagnosed with advanced cancer. Despite the pandemic, we've been able to continue engaging stakeholders and communities through online events like this one. I continue to write web-based content like the patient perspective column in the Integrative Medicine Service newsletter and social media material. And Desiree and I both consult as patient advisors on other grants and trials, other studies, logos, recruitment materials, and we continue to inform on patient-centeredness of integrative programming like mind-body workshops and the Integrative Medicine at Home membership program. Looking back, this photo collage, I couldn't fit you all in there. So looking back, I realized that it's on the strength of these relationships with each other that we move anything forward. Relationships cultivated with clinician scientists like Dr. Jun Mao, Dr. Sally Romero, Dr. Sheila Garland, Dr. Ting Bao, who's the current SIO president, relationships with clinical research coordinators like Christina Selyuzicki and Nick Emard, and with my fellow advocates like Betsy Glosik and Desiree Walker, Kimberly Richardson, and so many more. Next slide, please. So that first SIO conference I attended in 2016, I told you how it changed my life. And that was also where I met Betsy and Teresa Martin, Marianne Cerrone, Laura Pohl, and so many others, the group who began what is now the SIO Patient Advocate Committee. So a lot happens at these conferences. And the PAC has accomplished so much, and we're now an integral part of SIO. So there's another SIO conference this September, and it's a hybrid event, and it will be happening in Baltimore, Maryland, and also online. And I highly encourage you to register and to attend and join us, because who knows, it could be the conference that changes your life. Thank you. Desiree?
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to work alongside you. I just, want to share that, my journey has been what I consider to be an interesting one because research advocacy was not necessarily on my forefront when I started my advocacy work. However, after doing outreach for many years and specifically targeting the outreach to the African American, Afro Caribbean, or African Caribbean communities, the question always came up, why are we dying? And, it was a question that, concerned me. And I felt that it was so important to start to understand, what do we really know in research and what do we really know in medicine? And I took the opportunity to start attending conferences to start to understand more about the science, to be able to share that with the community. But also, I wanted to start to be a reviewer. And I've had the opportunity to work with the DoD as well as PCORI because I wanted to try to make sure that what the research questions were, they were ones that were going to actually help advance science for all people. And so that's how my research advocacy began. And then over the years, I started to meet clinician researchers who have then invited me to be on their study teams, et cetera. And as Jodi mentioned, we had the opportunity to meet over impact and have been working for a few years on that side. But one of the things that I would want to also say is that, while I was trying to advocate in the research world for making sure that, the research worked for everyone, as we've heard a lot about in clinical trials, they're not as diverse as they should be. I also realized, through the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship, that policy is important. And we really need to be able to advocate on the legislative side to make sure that what the findings are for research, the services are then available because so many people lack the opportunity for good health care just because, codes are not available to pay for certain aspects of care, which are important. And so again, I then started to try to understand, a little bit more about legislative advocacy and what it means to go on the Hill. And so I'm gonna just, share with you that, when I got involved with NCCS, they said that it was important to think about the federal advocacy. And so they had a Hill Day, but also they said it's important for you to do things on the state level as well. And so I've had the opportunity to do some Hill Days in Albany because I'm in New York City or New York State specifically. And so, just really, again, I spoke earlier about, having information and being knowledgeable. And so, I just share this, in terms of knowing which branch of government you are in their function is important, who your representatives are, and how do you actually find out about your legislative individuals. What have they sponsored? What type of bills have they put forth, and what their track record is would be important, as well as what type of congressional committees and subcommittees they're on, so that you can also be able to target your conversations as well. And again, it's important to know on the state level who is your representative and what type of comprehensive cancer coalitions are also available on the state level that you can get involved in. Because I think it is so important for us, as advocates, to make sure that we have a voice in this space because we have a compelling story, whether it's our personal journey or that of a loved one. We have a story that can be impactful, that can really begin to change what is to what should be. I think it's also important, as I talk about, the legislative piece about communication skills, because at the end of the day, you do want to be taken seriously. Everyone should want to be understood, be respected, but we also need to be respectful. At times, some of us may get a little bit more passionate and not necessarily think about how our tone can come across. And so I do think that it's important for us to be mindful of our volume as well as our attitude. And when you communicate, it should be with intention. And are you clear about what your message is so that you're able to convey it? Because oftentimes it's a very limited time frame you have, with the chief of staff or your Congress or state legislator. And you have to think about who can actually help to make sure that you're targeting the right person to get the job done. And what type of method of communication? Are you an in-person doing the Hill days? Are you better at writing letters? Are you also, better on the phone? Utilizing your skills in that way. And I also think that, when you're trying to make appointments, you want to make sure that it's mutually convenient time to connect so that you have the full attention of the person that you are having discussion with as well. And so in the tips that I'd like to offer to be an effective legislative advocate, it's important to think about, what is the strategy? Do you understand the issues by gathering information? And above all, it is so important for you to know the facts. It's important to realize that this is a business meeting, and so you need to be organized and prepared. It's also important for you to be on time. Remember to be professional and patient. And don't lose your composure because, some of the individuals may not be giving you the commentary that you so desire. It's important to not be intimidated and to be mindful of how your nervousness might be exhibited if this is something that is new that you're starting to do. Also, don't let others interrupt you, but you should also be mindful that you should not be interrupting others as well. I think it's so important that we think about this as a relationship, and you want to identify the gatekeeper. That's the individual who is going to connect you to your legislative person. And you want to build relationships there so that you can have the access that's needed, as well as build the trust. Say what's on your mind without being aggressive or being agitated. And when telling your story, know that you are the expert. I always encourage people to take notes so that you can make sure that you've captured what is said so that the organization that you may be doing Hill Day for, or even if you went as an individual constituent, that you know what has been discussed so that you can follow up appropriately. And I do encourage people to have business cards so that they can hand them out and make sure that the people know who they are and how to contact them if any type of follow-up is needed. And so I'd also say these are some areas: documentation. Remember how to be an advocate on the telephone in terms of having a script. Remember your phone manners. Make sure you're talking to the right person. You can recap, follow up. But I also think that if you're focused on writing, make sure that your format is correct, in terms of your letter or your email, and that anytime you have a meeting on the Hill, you need to make sure that you follow up and say thank you. Advocating in person, you need to be prepared, as I mentioned. You need to be professional in terms of your appearance. Your body language matters. You need to listen as much as you talk. And again, you always need to say thank you and follow up as appropriate. And I always say that it's so important in advocacy to do what you love, but also love what you do. And I just encourage you that when you think about whether it's research advocacy or legislative or any other form of advocacy, remember, it's supposed to fuel you, it's supposed to keep you balanced, and acknowledge how you've gotten here. And so self-care is so important. And remember, it's not an individual effort, but a team effort. And as I mentioned, self-care, I think, is a must. for all of us, especially if it's a diagnosis that have brought us to the world of advocacy. And I just want to encourage you to be mindful of boundaries and its importance, because it plays a vital role in how we interact with each other, and how others see us as well. And we need to recognize and maintain these healthy boundaries. I think that patience, perseverance, and sustenance is also important. We've experienced it if we've been diagnosed, that we've gone through these various steps. We also need to make sure that we bring that or maintain that in the world of advocacy as well. And know that it takes time to develop the skills to be an effective advocate. And I encourage people to actually find a mentor, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. If certain things have been established as best practices, you can learn and benefit from that, so that you can utilize your energies in a different way. And please know that change, although it's very important, it can be a long and often slow process. And so your contributions to progressive change is always valued, but know that it sometimes takes time. And sometimes resistance does come with the territory of advocacy. Be aware of that, and know that it often feels like a triathlon. It's not a sprint. So please pace yourself and manage your expectations. And so I leave you with this to ponder. The essential conditions of everything you do must be choice, love, and passion. Nadia Boulanger shared that quote. So we are going to open this up for questions, and you can definitely put them in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I want to thank you. I know Jodi will say her thanks as well, but we really thank you for being here this afternoon and giving us the opportunity to talk about how to find your voice in both research and legislative advocacy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Both of you have such a profound view from both sides between research and legislative advocacy. There's so much there for us to take away from that. And we're really appreciative that you've taken the time to do this for us. I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, please start typing them in the chat, and we're happy to answer questions. But I want to circle back to a couple of things. Desiree, you talked about urgency and patience. I think that's something we all feel as advocates. I was at two separate meetings. One was at AACR, one was at NCCS in Washington, two entirely different groups of advocates. And the same word came up between both of those groups, that we feel a sense of urgency. And I thought that was profound, that it was totally different groups of people. So indeed, but it does take patience, and it does help us develop resiliency. So thank you for bringing up that point. Very, very important. Jodi, you talked about your aha moment as working on writing and being published. And that's when you realized that, yes, you can be effective as an advocate. Desiree, I'd like to ask you what your aha moment was. When did you realize that this is what I have to do? This is really calling me.
So I definitely will say that, you know, my first aha moment, it did not relate to research or legislative advocacy. It was really my community work. When an individual who attended a talk that I had done said, you know, I came back the following year because I heard that you were going to be here, just to tell you thank you. Because, you know, the words that you shared, you know, made me realize that I had not been focused on my health. And I did. And unfortunately, I was diagnosed with cancer. But I'm thankful that, you know, it was your prompt that made me go and take action. And so that, you know, to me was very important. But I think on the research side, For me, it was sitting at my first DOD review, being new to the landscape. And I always like to say that, there was so many people around the table and they had so many letters behind their name. You sometimes, wonder, am I going to be considered an expert as well? And I remember, something was stated and I just figured, you know what, I better jump out there and stand up for the patients and put my voice out there. And, one of the doctors, then responded after to say, you know what, that was a really important point that Desiree raised, because I do think as clinicians and as researchers, we sometimes forget that. And so that was a moment for me when I realized my voice was heard, but also that it had some impact. And for those that may not have necessarily focused, it would get them to start to think differently about patients and their needs.
Would help if I'd unmute myself, right? Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think there's sometimes a little bit of stage fright with this as well, right? No matter what we're doing, unless you're just used to being a really vocal person. But that doesn't mean that you don't have something impactful to say. And I too have been surprised at times when doctors tell me you've raised a really good point. So that's really important to keep that in mind.
And I would just say,
any questions?
Before we just jump to the questions, I would just say, on the legislative side, oftentimes, we all, potentially vote. We put people into office, but we never really get a chance to meet them or potentially, meet their staff to weigh in. And I think that, having that opportunity to say, I'm a constituent and these are the things that are concerning to me, and actually have them listen. And that they can actually not just hear you, but they can actually respond back and recap what you said, and whether it's the congressman or the senator or just a council person. I think that it's important to know that now you have their attention, you have the floor, and that potentially there will be some action that will be taken. So I think, that is another, opportunity to really feel as if, someone's listening.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me when I went to do the legislative piece was that, maybe you went to Washington as a class trip when you were in school, or maybe you took your kids there to see what our nation's capital looks like. But when you actually walk those halls and you talk to your legislators, it's a totally different experience. And after I first started doing that, I came home, I listened to the news totally differently. I actually pay attention and in a much different way. It's a very profound experience to be able to make that connection and talk to people and know that you're heard.
Yeah, indeed.
Very valuable, very valuable.
So we do have a question from Patsy Hinson. Thank you, Patsy. How is the best way to help new research advocates find mentors? That's a good question.
Thank you, Patsy. So, I would say that, you attending many of the cancer conferences, there are advocates there. Some of them, I know, for example, AACR has the Scientist Survivor Program. You don't necessarily, and especially, the pandemic has shown us that you don't necessarily have to live next door to someone to be in communication. And so, we can utilize the technology that is available to be able to be mentored with people around the country at the end of the day. I also think that ASCO, they do have, a patient aspect to that annual meeting. And that gives you an opportunity, again, to connect with other individuals that are interested in research and what can be done. And so I do think that it is a bit of work at the end of the day, not only to be an advocate, but to find people who have actually, been on the journey prior to you. and then, to be able to strike up a conversation, because I've had the benefit of talking to people who have been doing this, since, its inception, where advocates, started, breast cancer advocates specifically started having a voice. And when they tell you the stories of how far they've come, it's really moving. But it also helps you to realize how you need to position yourself for the lift that is needed to take us the next leg of the journey.
I would also say that SIO Conference can also be a great place to, if you're interested in integrative oncology research, but any conferences poster session, those are where you meet the researchers who are still young enough to have time in their schedule to talk to you and are enthusiastic. And then through them, you can meet the PIs of their study, the principal investigators, and offer, say, the kind of cancer your poster is about is the kind that I was diagnosed with. I could offer, my perspective as a patient going through this treatment, or as a patient seeking this kind of integrative care.
Yeah, and I will also add to that, I think there's a realization now from NCI, NIH, that the patient's voice, and other institutions as well, that the patient's voice is really powerful, and that the patient's voice is imperative to making progress in what we're doing in research. So I know a lot of these studies that are going to be funded must have patient advocate involvement in it. So yeah, Jodi had some great recommendations on, poster sessions, or asking, how can I be involved? So the opportunities are definitely there and growing, right?
We have another question from Jean DeCarlo Wagner. Directly supporting cancer patients through treatment and in navigation, we will experience loss. I would love to see a place for advocates to support each other. What do you do to deal with all the losses? Excellent and most needed question, I think.
Yeah. I would agree. That's really profound, right? Yeah, we know we're a unique group, right? I feel like as advocates, we all have an understanding that people outside of this experience, having this experience, we have it and we get it. And when we lose one of our own, it's very unsettling is a very mild word to use for it, I think. And you bring up a great point, Jean, that yeah, there isn't a lot of support, and maybe that's something that we need to look at, is how to build support for advocates within our own community.
I was just going to add that, I have the good fortune of facilitating support groups. And I do think that it's important to consider, support groups throughout, your cancer journey. But there are many advocates, people doing advocacy within the support group as well. And although perhaps, Jean is talking about a specific advocate support group, I do think that it's important, for us just to be able to connect in spaces where our, emotional, mental, and physical health is addressed. And I can't, overemphasize, although yes, we've all, experienced many losses, I definitely think, the self-care piece is very important. Having the awareness that unfortunately loss is possible, but we still need to acknowledge the challenge that we may experience because some of the losses hit us a little harder than others. And so we then need to tap into any type of support system to help us through that difficulty, because unfortunately, loss at this stage is still possible. And I just wanted to acknowledge earlier, and it probably came into the chat, while I was speaking, but, thank Jack for the additional tip he had made, that, when Congress is not in session, they do have, home offices in your city, state. And so, you can also, try to build relationships with the local offices in order to be able to see them and talk about, the issues that you would like to raise in terms of bills, et cetera.
I'm also going to put in a shameless plug here because we were talking about Patsy's question about mentorship, and for somebody who's new to research advocacy. So I'm a liberal arts major. I am not a scientist by education or by brain bent. And so as part of onboarding as a patient advisor to the CHOICE study, and again for impact, we patient advisors were offered a free course through the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, I believe. And it was a course on the basics of scientific research, on patient outcomes research, and really gave me an excellent foundation. And the shameless plug is that we have among us the Patient Advocate Committee co-chair-elect, Kimberly Richardson, who with MD PhD students at University of Illinois has developed some research training modules. So these are housed on both the NCCS website and also SIO. If you go to SIO's homepage, it's integratemonk.org, and you'll see one of the three main columns says patients. And you click on learn more and it'll take you to a page where those are linked. So these are a great way to give yourself a refresher course in the science behind clinical research. And it also gets you to a point where you can go to the ASCO or SIO conference and walk or scroll through nowadays the posters and the abstracts and be able to read them, left to right, up and down, and ask the researcher very intelligent questions about his or her research. And this can also, more modules are coming, yay, stay tuned. But it is just to speak to the importance of being educated as far as that goes. And then a lot of it, I think you just learn by doing. PCORI, and Jack has put some others in here. PCORI, which is pcori.org, SWOG, the DoD, and other organizations have patient parts where you can go and sign up to be a reviewer, like Desiree has mentioned. And PCORI and the NIH are also funding organizations that, I didn't mention this, but PCORI funds with the grant funding, they fund patient partner co-investigators, and also, so more than just paying us for our time and our involvement, we are a key part of the engagement plan. Desiree and I, for the impact study, we're part of planning for these events, and we help write up the engagement report afterwards. So getting patients involved more than just in a nominative way. And that's really one thing I appreciate about both PCORI and Dr. Mao as a PI.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Folks have comments?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and we can have a discussion.
Yeah, and any experiences you want to share in research or in legislative activity? They're striking.
So where do these issues come from as far as like you may have an issue with maybe cost of prescription medicine. So how is that presented to us as patient advocates to take it forward? And is there guidance on what we should say and do?
So I'll jump out there and say, because, you know, most of the Hill Days that I've done it with a particular nonprofit. And usually when you're doing those Hill Days, they actually have a specific agenda for you. And so they are actually giving you all the bits and pieces for whatever the bill that they would like to put forth to try to get sponsorship, etc. And so there's an element of training that you receive in order to prepare you for that. Having said that, you know, I do think that as individuals, if you are having some challenge, you can definitely speak, you know, to the politicians, you know, on the city, state, or federal level, you know, because you put them in office. And so, you know, they're there to serve you. And so I would just say that one of the things that would be important outside of having your own particular story is doing a little bit of research to really see how, you know, is this issue not just impacting me, but it's actually impacting so many others, so that you can take that data with you in addition to your personal experience and share that in order to help them to understand why you need this to become a focal point. You know, potentially, you know, they can then determine how they can actually put forth a bill and what types of action that they can do and potentially get their colleagues to sign on in order to generate something. But I think that it's so important that whatever the issues are, they need to be raised. I like to say oftentimes, you know, we suffer in silence. We complain amongst our friends and our family who really can't help us. And the people, the powers that be, we don't set forth to them and hold them accountable. And I just think that, you know, this is what it's part of. But I will never say that we should just go and talk about what's happening to us as an individual. We have to say that this is what's impacting a large group, why it needs to get attention at the end of the day.
Right. And, you know, Desiree, I think there's also a piece to that, to understand that, you know, healthcare is impacted by what happens at the governmental level with CMS, you know, if the Center for Medicare Medicaid Services, right? If it's approved by them, then the trickle down often happens with our other healthcare, that the standard healthcare that everyone else has outside of Medicare, Medicaid. So if it's something that's approved by them, then other insurance companies will pick up on it. It might take a while, but that's kind of where it starts with government, especially, Mel, you bring up the question with cost of drugs, you know, and I think that's something that's being actively looked at right now. So Desiree, do you know, is there anything that NCCS has out right now about drug costs?
I don't know that they have a particular agenda item for that specifically. You know, I know that they're often, you know, looking at things that are impacting the experience of cancer patients and their survivorship. And obviously financial toxicity is one of them, but I can't really state a specific, you know, piece of legislation that they have actually put forth or are in the process of putting forth.
Yeah. That might be a good place to research it, though. I'm gonna go look and see if they're doing anything on that. Thanks for the prompt, Mel.
I have a quick question. So with things like the Moonshot Initiative, which take it out of the local level and bring it all the way to the president's desk, I don't know if Biden has actually proposed restarting that or if it's active, but how do we go to something at that very high level?
Kimberly is part of the Cancer Moonshot, and I don't know if she's able to speak, but she would be able to answer this.
I am actually a part of the NCI Moonshot Impact program, where researchers are looking at health management apps, systems, things of that nature. So the Moonshot program, as you know it, when he was once Vice President Biden, I think he's trying to reenact that through his new program and moving that, both moving the name of it as well as the money to the ARPA-H program. So it's really right now trying to get it through Congress before he can appropriate the money and set it aside to actually look at sort of dusting off Moonshot. So again, you just have to keep watching and, you know, talk to your legislators and tell them how you want that, that appropriation to be supported. Well, we can't just sit back. Another thing is someone mentioned about looking into healthcare. That's another side of advocacy. Sometimes we only look particularly at our disease type and we do advocacy around that, but there are new organizations that are coming together, like Patients Rising. I went through their course for patient advocates, and you could be of any sort of any disease type, and it really helps you. It's very similar to my program in terms of modules and videos to help you understand the issues around affordable health care and step therapy for things like that. Those were things I didn't even know about, couldn't even consider. But when we think about how clinical trials are impacted and a great drug comes out into the market, how our insurance companies sometimes will make you go through step therapy, which means they'll give you the lowest cost, what's already on the market, and make you take that drug before you can actually take what's available through a clinical trial. And that's impacting a lot of people, especially if it's a life-threatening disease. So that's the other side of advocacy, right? We talk more about sharing our stories, but then there's the other side of how do we pay for our care? And it'd be really cool to see some synergies around that for each disease type. But I think most importantly, as both of you have stated today, the importance of research advocacy is so key to our policy advocacy. Our stories just go so far, right? We need to be able to articulate what is the latest research and why it's important for the Appropriations Committee to give us that money for funding. If we don't know what the research is, we're really spending our time sharing our story and doing the work of advocacy organizations and just, you know, presenting legislative asks. We need to know, we need to understand the research that's impacting our disease.
Exactly. That's a great point, Kimberly. These two issues, these two types of advocacy are intimately connected. So,
well, and I just want to add one other thing, you know, that I have seen helpful. Yes, there are many different types of patient advocacy organizations out there, but I do think that there is some value because oftentimes when people are looking for advocates for a specific or survivors, you know, they reach out to patient advocacy organizations to see if they have anyone that they can put forth. And I would just wanted to say in terms of Eileen's question, that oftentimes some of these advocacy organizations have you know, been contacted when there is something on the government level that they would like to try to get some people to talk to see who might be a right fit, can come through that. Because I know through NCCS, you know, I had the opportunity to speak you know, to someone who was just trying to see what, you know, the world is from the Moonshot perspective, from a patient advocate perspective. So I would just say that, you know, yes, you know, we do have to manage our time, but, you know, finding the right organizations to affiliate with and building the relationships there can also get you access to, you know, greater opportunities on the government level.
Absolutely. Great. This has been a phenomenal conversation today and education. We thank you so much, Desiree and Jodi, for all your advocacy work, for all the time that you put into this meeting today. And, you know, this is going to be housed on our YouTube channel at SIO. So once it's up and running, you can go back and look, because your slides were so great and had so much information in it. You could probably actually click through and look up some of these links that Desiree had in there, and Jodi too. So thank you all so much for attending. We're so grateful that you took the time today, and look forward to seeing you again at the next quarterly SIO Patient Advocate meeting. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, see you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.